welcome everyone to our webinar today. Thanks so much for making the time to join us and obviously delve into the topic that we'll be looking at today, which is exploring opportunities back home, a guide for South Africans moving back to South Africa. So obviously there's a lot of things in the news that come up with this, and obviously it's a big topic of conversation is South Africans immigrating and where you're going, etc. But today we'll be looking at the sort of the activity from the other side of the equation. So basically, just to set the scene, the thoughts and process of returning to South Africa after an often challenging relocation process and setting up a new life in another country is quite a complex and emotive decision most of the time. So we wanted to sort of provide some insights and perhaps some practical insights as well as soft insights into this decision, and hopefully provide some info that helps in that decision making. So as I mentioned, there's been a lot of stories in the media about South Africans returning. Some of these are not backed by hard evidence, but they do indicate some activity with various different service providers, dealing with these South Africans returning to the country. And what we've seen anecdotally is reasons South Africans choose to return include things like geopolitical instability in certain parts of the world, the cost of living, obviously family back home and that support system, and also lifestyle benefits. And in terms of sort of hard evidence, a recent migration report by Stats SA, which is the first one that they've done, has shown that the number of South Africans returning in the last 10 years has slowed. But the fact remains that some do return and often may bring sought after skills as well as some spending power with them, which is much welcomed. And then just in terms of overseas populations, the UK does have the highest population of South Africans at around 250,000, followed by Australia with around 200,000. So obviously we have a big diaspora overseas and mostly in the UK and Australia. I'll just ask each of our panelists to very briefly introduce yourselves, please. So Angel, if you could kick us off, please.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from a very sunny Johannesburg. It's supposed to be winter here, and it's already 27 degrees outside and bright sunshine. I'm Angel Jones. I'm the founder of Homecoming X. We're an executive search firm specializing in permanent, fractional, and hourly talent. I am happily married. I've got a daughter of 20 at Stellenbosch University and a son of 16. And we're currently working across 20 different African countries, helping private companies across the continent find top globally experienced Africans. Good to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Angel. Just before we move to the next panelist, I realized I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Sean Godway. I'm Gauteng chapter lead for the South African Chamber of Commerce. Based in Johannesburg, and I did spend about 4 years living in London before returning in 2017. So that's sort of where my perspective comes for the conversation. But moving on to our next panelist, Candice, if you could please introduce yourself.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Candice McGain, and I'm the CEO of a company called Abroad Scope. We specialize in South African immigration law, citizenship, visas, and short-term travel visas for foreigners coming into the country. We have our headquarters based in Cape Town. It's not so sunny here today, unfortunately. Angel, you got the sun. We got the misery UK weather. But usually quite a sunny Cape Town, and our business is quite a vibrant, growing, fast-moving one. A very ever-changing legislation that we have to keep on top of, and yes, I'm so excited to be sharing this with you today, and all the challenges you may face with moving back to South Africa, bringing in your foreign spouses, settling your home in South Africa, be it Cape Town or Joburg. We're here to assist. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a panelist.
Great, thanks, Candice. Nick, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, my name's Nick Sachs. I am In terms of the chamber, I'm sort of the youth lead in terms of the South African Chamber of Commerce in the UK. My day job is I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Tapio Capital. We are a venture builder that partners with founders across the globe to help them build their businesses and grow it and scale it to what their needs. We also run a technology development firm called Coding It that operates on a global scale but has its tech team based in Johannesburg in South Africa. So I'm going to be adding my views and my experiences of what it's like to run a company across the UK and South Africa. I'm currently actually sitting in London. I think I'm the only panelist in London currently, and it's missing the warm South African weather. It's sunny, but it's about 15 degrees here. So yeah, that's me. Back to you, Sean.
Thanks, Nick. Krieger, if you could just tell us a bit about yourself quickly.
Good day, everybody. Greetings from Cape Town. I'm the Managing Director of Big Bay Business Advisory, a tax consultancy, focusing on domestic and international tax law. And we focus primarily on tax compliance and tax planning. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Krieger. And last but not least, Matthew. Please go ahead.
Guys, Matthew DeVet. I am an attorney, and I just want to let you know that we're not all that bad. That said, I just need to let you all know that you are being billed by the hour or part thereof. I've been an attorney for 12 years based in Cape Town with a focus on commercial law. And recently I have co-founded Executive Legacy Partners, and we specialize in drafting wills, estate planning, and administration of deceased estates. I have 4 children, so estate planning is very critical to myself, and I take it very seriously for my clients as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. So yeah, welcome to our panelists, and thanks so much for joining us. So we're going to jump straight into our questions for our panelists to sort of pick their brains and see what they can tell us on this interesting topic. So Angel, we're going to start with you. So you obviously have some interesting experience in sort of executive search and recruitment, and also, like you mentioned, it's obviously UK is in your remit, but you also work across the continent as well. So I think you have some really interesting insights sort of on the ground. So what would be interesting is if you could tell us what the main reasons are that people come back to SA, in your experience in dealing with them, and has this changed over the years? And what do the numbers look like in terms of your business and what you're seeing, particularly from the UK? And then linked to that, what is the job market like for those South Africans who are returning to South Africa?
The reasons for returning very much are around a heart decision versus a head decision. In fact, this is our whole mantra, #Heart Africa. I lived myself in London for 7 years. I heard Mandela speak on the steps in Trafalgar Square going, "I love you all so much, I want to put you in my pocket and take you home." I was one of the many South Africans that burst into tears and said, "I'm coming home." And we still see that same consistent reasons. Number one, people we come home is for friends and family. They want to have that sense of belonging. They want their grannies and grandpas close by to their kids. They want the kids running barefoot on the lawn. I love the quote from somebody who returned from Toronto. They said, at home you can make new friends, but abroad you can make new friends, but you can't make old friends. And I think very much this idea of, this is my home, this is where I belong, I'm contributing to my own economy, is really something completely from a much more of a heart place. The difference we found more recently is that before, people were very much, the heart and the head were kind of almost competing, and being unhappy, a couple of years ago wasn't really seen as a viable reason for not, for actually deciding I'm coming back. But with the onset of COVID, with the idea of mental health being so important, that becoming much more of a subject matter, people, reading up much more about it, realizing that, they can't have happy kids if they're unhappy parents, that the idea of feeling unhappy is a far bigger reason now that people are coming back, which is great. So, the sense of home and familiarity, and the quality of life and adaptability. I mean, we do have it amazingly here, despite the challenges of load shedding. People say, well, I've got electricity, but I'm sitting in a tiny little flat and it's cold outside, and we say, well, it's very hot outside, there's lots of space to run around, and it's warm all the time. So that really idea of quality of life, the social connections, that cultural diversity, the comparative disillusionment with life abroad, particularly in the UK. We see people citing issues such as high living costs, poor infrastructure, social challenges, and factors are those kinds of factors, and very much the idea of, what can that sense of purpose, what can I do to contribute to my own economy instead of somebody else's? The work that we do, we find when we're trying to convince somebody to, also if we've got a job for somebody to say, look, this is a great role back home, we find if people are already going, well, what is the package? Those hard factors, they're not as ready to return as those who say, I'm going to make that leap, I'm going to take that chance, I'm going to come back. And the remuneration piece, it's never going to be the same as sterling for rand, but I'm seeing all of the other benefits of coming back are so huge. Schooling, if you've got younger children and you are able to afford the independent schooling system here, it's ridiculous what money can buy. You pay a fifth of what you would pay abroad for the quality of education and facilities in schools that you get. So from a job market point of view, I'm telling you, if there was lots and lots and lots of jobs on offer, we know people would come flooding home. That we found that when the economy was doing well, 10-ish plus years ago, the critical skills needed are everything from engineering, lots of ICT, obviously multimedia, education. We desperately need science teachers, lots of business managers, finance managers, general managers, strategists, architects. I mean, it goes on where it really is. But I think what's important is to think that if you've made the decision to return, to then wait and think you're going to get a job before you come back is probably not going to happen. I think it's worth really saving as much money as you can so that you've got some runway when you return. It's worth talking to your current employer to say, well, can I actually establish a South African office? Or I found this amazing entrepreneurial idea that works abroad. What can I do to come and start that? But already start building your own personal brand. LinkedIn is a great place to start building that, become an opinion leader in your specific industry that is strong. And I also like to post our candidate sign-up link where we are doing more and more, not just permanent placements, but fractional placements. And that can even work remotely. So you could, for example, be a fractional chief marketing officer in a business in South Africa remotely 2 days a week, on a consistent basis, and that starts to get you into that swing of coming back. But I think it's very much this hard decision. I'm going to take the leap. You will find a job. You will find a way. There's so much work to be done. Being able to take that leap and really coming home it's the hard thing, and trust your gut as much as you've never had before. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Angela. Interesting to hear those insights, because you obviously deal with these people day to day, and there's with the other topic of immigration and leaving South Africa, coming back. There's a lot of noise, I suppose, around the topic, and a lot of people choose to immigrate, and I always say it's a very personal decision, and everyone has their own unique decision making, sort of unique context to make those decisions. But there are clear reasons for people coming back as well, even if it's in smaller numbers. But it's useful to hear exactly what that is, from people who know. So that's great. Thanks, Angel. Candace, I'm going to move on to you now. And actually, these points that I'd like to raise with you are related to a question that someone's just raised as well. But if we don't cover all of that, we will come back to the questions, like I said. But Candace, in your arena of residency and visas and that type of thing, obviously this is, I guess, one of the first considerations people will have when deciding to make the move, whether it's leaving South Africa or returning. But in terms of South Africans returning from the UK in this case, if people have children that are born in the UK to an SA parent or parents, would they be eligible for South African citizenship? And then also, what would be involved with the foreign spouse obtaining permission to stay in the UK? So basically, if you have, as South African, you have British kids and a British spouse, one or the other, what are the sort of steps involved there?
Well, I mean, for the last couple of months, we've definitely seen an uptick on returning South Africans with their foreign spouse, with their South African children that are not yet registered to be South African. Because the process of actually doing that with the South African embassy in the UK is just laborious. It takes a long time. For them to get their South African passports before travel is sometimes not possible. So what is happening is a lot of these children are entering the country as a tourist, and while they're here, they're resolving this situation of citizenship. But through that process, what gets uncovered is actually a determination of the parents' citizenship. So, I mean, consultancies like ourselves need to actually engage with the client from abroad before they even make the intent to move here, because at that moment, we can assess whether the South African parent was ever at a situation or in a junction where he lost his South African citizenship, because that's actually something that does happen. There was an announcement around 2010, 2011, that South Africans that obtained alternative citizenship ran the risk of losing their South African citizenship. And that's actually a law that they put into effect from 1994, but officially actually broadcasted it to the South African High Commission. They were supposed to notify all South Africans that left and burnt their green barcoded ID books on their balconies and said, I'm not coming back to South Africa, not realizing the implications of doing that meant your kids could not obtain South African citizenship. Obtaining foreign citizenship without notifying Home Affairs was a downfall, right? And there's a process called a resumption of South African citizenship, which is something you could do should you lose your South African citizenship. You can do that process. It's done in South Africa. You have to prove you've been living here for a period of 12 months and that you're on a payroll somewhere and that you've got a utility bill and that you've made proper commitments and ties to South Africa. And when doing that, you can, get your South African citizenship reinstated, which is great. But ultimately, yes, if you are South African, mother or father, you can pass your citizenship over to your children, and they should actually do that application from abroad. If it's not possible, check with a company like ourselves to verify whether the parents have lost their citizenship at any stage, and then rather do the application from South Africa. It's a little bit quicker. And ultimately results in the children getting their South African citizenship, birth certificates and passports. But yeah, it's a complex situation at the moment. Our Minister of Home Affairs on the 10th of April released a white paper. It's 292 pages long, and it speaks very sort of high level about his intent around citizenship and how this will actually be handled going forward. And this is obviously if they, when the elections and they be put into power again, we can definitely anticipate some disruption there. So it's better if we could handle these applications prior to the implementation of that act. While it may not affect the direct, birthright that is given and passed over to a child, I do think it's worthwhile getting your documents in order. Having good housekeeping is really important as a South African living abroad.
Great, thanks, Candice. And just while you're on this, like I said, that question did come up, and someone is moving back with their children, and they were saying they need to apply for a birth certificate in order for them to attend school, but they can only do that when they arrive. So is there a way to bypass this with a study visa? So could your children arrive and start attending school if you haven't sorted out their citizenship yet?
So technically, I mean, there are two routes, right? There's the immigration side of it, and then there's the citizenship side of it. In my, in my best opinion, I think you should stay in terms of citizenship because that's the right way. Because once you've started that immigration process, it's very difficult to unwind it. Now you have a expiry date on the system with the Department of Home Affairs, and your visa is due to expire, but in the background, you've actually become a South African citizenship. It's messy, it's complicated. I'd rather have a situation where they manage the expectation correctly and their timelines correctly and apply for the correct documentation, and the child be admitted as a South African. this also has Western Cape Education and Johannesburg Education Department impact, because when registering a child as a student, they actually have to use an ID number or a study visa. And then the other challenge is that you can't change your status in the country. So if coming in on an automatic entry visa, 90 days at the airport, and then applying for study visa is actually not possible without special waivers and conditions. So what we want to do is, as I said, attack this prior to departure, make sure that they're all on the same page. They understand exactly what the turnaround times are. I deal with a lot of cases like this. So often what we do is we do a 90-day tourist visa. We notify immigration that they're in the process of applying for citizenship. And then we correct those entries at the airport and make sure that they are landed as South Africans. So it doesn't impact their foreign passport. And it also gives them a permission to stay in the country pending the outcome of their status, their citizenship status, that is, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Candice. I think that's really helpful. There's been another question come in which for you, which we'll get to during the Q&A session. I think this is an area where obviously there's often a lot of confusion, and I think people like yourselves can add a lot of value. So thanks very much for that. Next, we're going to move on to Cregan, who is a tax whiz. I think that's the right way to say it. And obviously another area where people want to understand the regulations and impacts, etc. So Cregan, I wanted to ask you, if somebody is returning to South Africa, so immigrating back, what would they need to do in order to be tax compliant? And then also, is it possible to be double taxed in the UK and South Africa?
Okay, hi Nick. Hi Sean. Hi guys. With regards to that question about people coming in, I think we just need to understand that immigration is not tax residency. You need to qualify to be a tax resident of South Africa. And in doing so, there are two tests that one would need to perform. The one would be your physical presence test. How many days are you in this country for? And also, are you ordinarily resident? So that being said, what would that mean? That would mean that if you are a tax resident of South Africa, you would be now taxed on your worldwide income. I think at this juncture, I know we need to summarize taxation in a nutshell here. So not to go overboard, the best thing I would think someone coming into a foreign land, or even a land that you left and coming back later on, because laws change over time, especially taxation. I mean, taxation changes pretty much every year. It would be wise to recruit a professional tax practitioner who is registered and someone who does understand international taxation. I will give you a quick win now. What you could do to lessen the burden. Tax admin is paramount. If you've got your tax administration done, you are pretty much winning. So that means keep all your documentation. It comes down to documents. You want to be able to discharge the burden of proof to make your case so that you can win. And that's always going to come to documentation. Is it possible to be double taxed? Yes, it is possible to be double taxed between two states. South Africa does have a double tax agreement with many countries around the world. And what a double tax agreement is a treaty that prevents double taxation and double non-taxation. Also, it's there to prevent tax evasion and also tax avoidance. In those treaties and in domestic law, you are given an opportunity where you can receive reprieve from being taxed twice. That may be in form of deductions on taxes already paid, tax credits, and exemptions. So yes, it is possible, but also you do have mechanisms in the law so that you can not be taxed twice. That being said, one thing to very quickly chat about would be the tax evasion, tax avoidance area that I mentioned just now. Tax authorities currently in our market, being a more globalized and data-centric market, have got access to third-party data. And through these tax treaties, are now able to share information cross-border. In this time, it is wise to declare as much of your information as possible so that you are fully compliant and not leave anything out, because the subsequent penalties and interest is judged on a level where your penalties would go from anything 10% up to 200%, depending on the gravity of the situation. So you never want to be in a situation where you are non-compliant.
Great, thanks, Cregan. I guess you can share the tricks and the loopholes offline, but it's not what everyone is interested for. But thanks so much for that insight. Next, we're going to move on to Matthew. Obviously, you mentioned you have a legal background and you specialize in estate planning. So something else very important when you start, perhaps having a financial footprint in two different countries, I think things can possibly get slightly complicated. So it'd be useful if you could briefly tell us, first of all, about the importance of a last will and testament, particularly in the context we're talking about. And then also, I think something that would stand out to many people is if an individual has assets in South Africa and the UK, do they need more than one will?
Thanks, Sean. I know last will and testament, wildly exciting, but this is the most neglected document. It's one that gets kicked down the road, and it's actually so important. So I'm going to move on in a moment to sort of generally why you should think about if you haven't already got a will, but just specifically for the purposes of this event, for the people watching today, they may have once when they were in South Africa drafted an old will before they left. Okay. And who knows what's happened subsequent to that? They may have tried to sign that will, South African will, in the UK, and that has an implication. They may have tried to draft a will in the UK and maybe misapplied some of the formalities there and not got that right. They may be coming back now and wanting to know what will is valid and where should I have my will. And of course, like you alluded to, they've got assets maybe still left in the UK or investments that are going to stay in the UK. They're going to set up a life again in South Africa. And of course, then the question is, how do I deal with this multi-jurisdictional asset ownership? Do I do it in one will or two wills? Okay, so firstly, I just want to start off with generally having a will. The importance of coming back to South Africa and knowing that you have a valid will here, or at least replacing your UK will with, the South African context, is if you die without a will in South Africa, your estate will be wound up in accordance with the provisions of intestate succession. Big word. All it means is you don't have a will. Here's a bunch of principles that will be applied by virtue of the law, and they're not going to be your wishes. They're going to be put on you. So your assets will go here, there, and everywhere, and you might not want to send your assets that way. So you really don't want to die without a will or a valid will, or get the will wrong because it was done in a different jurisdiction and doesn't maybe apply here. Secondly, you may have left a will here and it's wildly outdated because you've now grown as a family, or I've had clients that have still got in their will that, there's trust set up for their minor children and their children are now majors and married. So you need to account for changing circumstances to update that. But, people think, well, why does this matter anyway? When I'm dead, it's their problem, right? It's my family's problem, not my problem. Well, we know that's not true because, we have families that we're leaving behind, and we want to sleep well at night knowing that they're looked after and that our estate and our assets flows in the way that's going to best take care of them. So I just want to very quickly just mention and run over a few interesting things or a few important things that you should put in a will, and then I'll move on to the question of should we have one or two wills if there's assets in two countries. So you get to select your heirs and legatees in your will. Okay, what does this mean in more jargon? So a legatee is, you might have many assets, houses, cars, yachts, you might own an island, who knows, shares in companies, and you might want to leave specific assets to specific people. Who knows, maybe it's just a special thing that, sentimental, that wants to go to someone, or maybe it's business succession planning. You want to leave a business to someone. So in your will, you get an opportunity to state specific assets and leave those to specific people. Okay, then that's your legatees. Your heirs are the people that get sort of the balance of your estate, and you decide who gets the balance after all estate expenses have been paid and in what proportions they get it. So you get to choose exactly where your assets go. So that's one important thing. Having a will, you get to think about that, list your assets and make some plans there. Second is, and I'm not sure how many percentage of the viewers have minor children, but guardianship. That's important. We don't think about that. Who's going to be the guardian of my children should we unfortunately both disappear into the Lost TV show while traveling between South Africa, the UK and South Africa? You need to pick someone who's emotionally and financially suited to look after your children. And that's something you sit down and work through together. I'm not a family lawyer, but it's a mess when you don't appoint a guardian in your will. And then, of course, the law steps in and we start thinking of who's best. It becomes difficult. While we're on the topic of children and minor children, in South Africa, if you leave assets to minors, and it's cash, that cash will go into a guardians fund, which is a state-owned and run fund. And that the guardians must apply for monthly maintenance for the children, and that is not ideal. So rather, there's an opportunity to create a testamentary trust, which is run by trustees that you trust, to provide for the children's maintenance and general welfare until they become majors and can stand on their own 2 feet, in which case they can distribute everything to them. Another very important point is your executor. This is the person that actually winds up your estate. That's a very important decision, and you don't want one appointed for you. You want to make that decision and appoint someone and it could be a spouse who could then, or a family member as a backup, who could then appoint a professional company or firm specializing in estate administration. Simultaneous death, something people always forget. The wills usually go, I leave everything to my spouse, and the other one's will says, I leave everything to my spouse, and they forget about what happens if something happens to them together. So we can provide for that. And finally, and I alluded to it earlier, business succession. You may come to South Africa with having major money and want to invest in a business or start a business, and you need to think now how I'm going to structure that, but also who's going to take over one day? Is it for my kids? Who's going to be succeeding me in the business? Just watch out there for any shareholders agreements you might sign that provide for their own buy-sell arrangements. Right. The very specific and pertinent question is, you've left the UK, you've come back to South Africa, you've left some assets or investments in the UK, maybe an immovable property that you're going to use to just go and, as they say, the swallows, follow the sun a little bit. But you're a South African citizen and you're here now, and you've rooted here and your assets are here as well. So we once had a client that was in the UK, South African citizen, and had assets in Spain, and he was quoted £2,000 to work out how on earth they're going to deal with his will, because there were so many different jurisdictions and assets. So it's not an easy topic. We deal with it case by case, but there is a case to have two wills. Okay, one in the countries that you have assets in, and one in South Africa, your homeland, once it becomes your home once again. And this is for a wide range of things. So firstly, if you have immovable property, let's say, or any other property in a foreign country, I'm talking non-South African, outside of South Africa, the laws of that land might require formalities. They might require a locally drafted will to deal with those assets. So after you pass, someone comes and presents your South African will, and now suddenly there's a problem because it was drafted outside of their country, and now we can't. There's a delay in transferring that assets. And another just practical thing is they might not recognize the letters of executorship. So when you are appointed someone as your executor, and after you pass, they go to the master of the High Court, and they get letters of executorship giving them power to become you essentially and manage and take control of the assets. Now that might not be recognized in a foreign country. So rather we appoint executors in the other country in terms of a second will to then go and deal with those assets from an administration point of view. So the whole idea is to delay the winding up time of your estate, because they can take long in any event. And very lastly on this, sometimes people say, I signed my will overseas. In South Africa, South African citizens can't sign legal documents outside of South Africa, except if they go to an embassy or a number of prescribed places. And you might be signing and doing in terms of South African law, but you may have been in the UK and you may have missed the UK provisions, and now you have no will. So again, it's important to come back, see what you have, take stock, just draft a brand new will, see if you need to deal with both, and make sure that you can sleep at night knowing that everything is covered should you, in the event of you passing.
Great, thank you, Matthew. A topic obviously people maybe don't want to think about, or it's sort of bottom of their list to get to in terms of admin, but quite important, especially like you said, if you're fortunate enough to have assets in different countries, etc. You don't want to cause issues for your family in the future. So those are great insights. Obviously, big topics, but I was going to say, all the panelists will be happy for you to contact them with any queries afterwards, and would obviously be very happy to assist you professionally as well, I'm sure. But yeah, thanks, Matthew. Nick, coming to you. So obviously your background a bit different as a business owner and entrepreneur. So you're still based in the UK, but you have some business interests in South Africa, and you also worked as a professional in the UK when you moved there. So I think the conversation often, in terms of South Africans leaving and coming back, does tend to focus on professionals, working for corporates, etc. But there are, as South Africans, there's a strong entrepreneurial spirit. So there's often entrepreneurs, taking businesses or starting businesses across the different countries. So in your experience, and there's actually two questions that come up based on this. So two of our attendees have businesses in the UK and they've moved back, and they have certain questions about that. But to start off, what are some of the challenges that you've seen and perhaps encountered in doing business across the UK and South Africa? And also another interesting point, obviously, in the world of remote working is what advice do you recommend for someone starting a fully remote business in that context?
Yeah, sure. Well, before going to the challenges, let me start off with the why South Africa. So having a business in the UK, it's a big challenge to find outsource opportunities, because labor in the UK is very expensive, and labor in South Africa is significantly cheaper, and we are on a competitive basis compared to other outsourcing countries such as India, Romania, especially from a tech perspective. So we chose South Africa because of the time zone is we're also, a lot of me and my partners are South African, so we know the market. We know that South Africa is a good place, and because of its the availability of labor and the skills that are there to be able to service our clients here in the UK. Also, as being a South African, we want to sort of give back to South Africa the way that we can. I mean, I read, I think, a stat somewhere that for every South African that moves home, professional South African, it creates 8 to 9 more jobs in South Africa. And if South Africa is going to grow as a country and improve on our GDP growth rate, which was this current year was 0.4%, we need to create jobs within South Africa. And the best way to do that is to have business in South Africa. But saying that, there are challenges. I've got 4 main challenges which you need to have when you're dealing with in South Africa. One is the biggest one that we had was the FX restrictions and the bank accounts that are available down there. There isn't in the UK. You have a Monzo and a Revolut where you can open the bank account up really easily and sort of get trading straight away. In South Africa, there's a little bit more. There's no challenger banks there, so you're going to be dealing with your FNBs, your net banks, and all of them, which aren't as great from a tech perspective as they are abroad. And also the dealing with the Reserve Bank. If you're having a business in the UK and South Africa and want to move money between the two, you need a lot of permissions from the Reserve Banks to do that. Getting money into South Africa is a lot easier, but if you do that, you can get things wrong, which I found out. If I was labeling things incorrectly, and that then this allowed us, when we wanted to move money from South Africa to the UK, companies have a zero allowance in terms of what they can move. So you need, for every, even if it's 1 to 2 rands, you need approval from the Reserve Bank to get that done. And luckily I've sought out Candace, who's helping us out on that. We're now almost for a way to be able to move money freely within our intercompanies the way we would want to. The next thing is just making sure you've got the tax structures and how you plan to operate the businesses. I won't talk too much on that, but it's just something to think about. Third one is working with load shedding. Just, me and my girlfriend, we spent 3 months in South Africa. Even though I think it's on an upward trend I think it's here to stay for the foreseeable future, but it's something that you have to bear in mind during office hours. And there are ways around it, like, you can buy your inverters and your generators, and you can then go to office spaces. We were in Cape Town, and there were a lot of co-working spaces or coffee shops that we went to that are in different zones that all have generators and that, and they're quite cheap. I think they're 100 to 200 rand to go to these co-working spaces just for the day, and just hang out there and have coffee. We would just go there for the time we had load shedding, and then go back to our flat where we would continue to work. And then lastly is it's the managing a remote team. And this is important because now, as Angel mentioned, that people are a lot more cognizant of mental health, and being able to work from home is also here to stay, but it's more on a hybrid method. But what's happening with that is that with hybrid working fully remote working, is people lose the personal touch, and developing those personal relationships with people that you have within, when you're at an office 24/7, when you're at an office all the time with people. So it's about trying to build a business that sort of still has that element in it and brings those challenges in, and which it could be like simple things like we use Slack in our business, and we would say good morning to people on a daily basis. It sounds a bit silly, but having a channel on your Slack or your WhatsApp where you allow people to share personal things on the business, and people then are encouraged to comment, just to bring in that personal element. Because with the advent of Zoom, you sort of you say how people are doing for 2 minutes, and then you jump in. So it's trying to bring that in, and also encouraging people to meet up at least once a month if you can. I don't know if you're in South Africa and the UK, it's a bit difficult to do that, but planning retreats, you're saving a lot of money on office space. So, spend some of that budget as you would taking your teams away for the weekend to have that team bonding, and having people getting that should bring in that cohesiveness, because people work better if they like each other at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Yeah. Obviously, some challenges were definitely not impossible, and you can obviously find ways around things, especially the Forex. I know the exchange controls can be quite a mission, but it's obviously good to hear that with the right person, you can set the structures in place to kind of overcome that hurdle. And then, interesting, you mentioned remote working, because, a lot of people moving back might leave businesses back in the UK, etc. And it's become obviously a more kind of common or big part of life is all this remote working, whether you're running a business or you're working for a corporate. So those are some interesting insights there. So thanks very much for that. I just want to say, obviously the tax considerations, that often brings up a lot of questions, and we've had a couple that have been answered in the chat. But just wanted to let you know that you can check the South African Chamber website and look at the video webinar archive there. And there are a number of webinars on taxation that might be of interest. And like I said, our panelists would be happy to get in touch. So we have had 1 or 2 questions come up, and our panelists have actually answered those in the sort of question chat. But I'll just mention one. So Etienne said he was planning on keeping his UK company going, and he's a consultant, but he's also going to start a Cape Town office. So he asked how his personal taxes would work. And Cregan said it would depend on where you would meet the requirements of a tax resident. So SA taxes their own residents and on their income and on a worldwide basis. So basically anything with that, depending if you've got income or assets coming in, very much depends on where you're a tax resident, and there's very clear guidelines on that. Mainly, the number of days you spend in the country in question, which Cregan mentioned. And then an interesting one that came in for Candace was that there's a potential legal challenge to the loss of SA citizenship by taking another citizenship. So those who did lose their SA citizenship or give it up to acquire another citizenship can resume their SA citizenship without returning to SA for 12 months. So you have the option to kind of restart that. And Candace says that is correct, and determination of citizenship would apply, and the conditions of resumption would still need to be met. But yeah, perhaps that is quite interesting, Candace. Do you maybe want to just jump in there? Because I might not summarize.
Yeah, we have, it's a constitutional court ruling, sorry. And Home Affairs at this point haven't contested it. So it looks like it could potentially roll out into implementation. But you see, the challenge with companies like ourselves is we're dealing with the Act as of right now, and what we can achieve with the Department of Home Affairs and what we can achieve with the South African Embassy. So yes, it is definitely going to be eradicated. It's definitely going to be ruled as unconstitutional. You should not have the risk of losing your South African citizenship. There's a whole lot of birth and naturalization implications that comes with losing your original citizenship of birth. That is always important to keep that intact. And Home Affairs have acknowledged that Section 4.1 of the Act has now been eradicated. However, it's not been implemented. So what we need to see is how Home Affairs will be dealing with this on a day-to-day basis leading up to, say, for example, post the elections and actually the implementation of this Act. It's a win for us that have those South Africans that have, taken up alternative citizenship and did not do the process of retention of citizenship. Yes, it is a win. You won't have your citizenship taken away from you, but I'm have no doubt there will be some administrative burden or hurdles you're going to need to jump through in order to get that reinstated. So we are keeping our ear to the ground. We'll keep you updated. We do have a newsletter that we send out, so it's probably worthwhile you reaching out to us, because these sort of situations are case by case, on a case by case basis. Also, citizenship is very much determined on the year that you got it, what the law was at that time, what was permitted, what wasn't permitted, and where do we stand at this present moment. So each person's case is very unique. We can sort of look at that case by case.
Awesome. Thanks, Candace. Yeah. Again, matters tend to be a bit complicated, but not impossible. But I think the right professional to guide you along the way is really important. So great. So yeah, we've had one or two questions about tax, and I know they aren't been answered in the chat. But Cregan, I know you just answered one, and we did touch on this, but it might be useful just for you to shed some light on the topic. So someone said they retaining a business in the UK, and would they be taxed on those dividends? So it does talk obviously to where you tax residents, but Cregan, just to clarify that as a practical example, if you could just your comments on that. So what would happen with those dividends earned in the UK? Cregan, are you still with us? Yeah, there we go.
Hey, Sean, I just finished replying to that. There's a lot more to that question. A lot more information is required in order to answer that. I mean, is that company registered, a resident in the other state? The ownership requirements. Is it really a dividend as defined? There's a lot more information needed to answer that question. So we really need to look at the merits of that transaction before we can answer that. So I take that offline and explore more into the detail behind those transactions and the setups.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Cregan. No, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the unique considerations and context at hand will inform these things. So again, more more investigation, and I think advice is quite important. And yeah, just on that, some of the panelists have shared their contact emails in the chat, but if I could ask the others who haven't, maybe just drop your emails there, because I know obviously most of you, all of you, are happy for people to reach out to you, and I mean there's also things like LinkedIn, etc. So the conversation could keep going, but we've got about 5 minutes left, so I just wanted to put something maybe from a different angle, starting with you, Angel. Is there any sort of story of clients you've worked with that's been quite interesting or uplifting in terms of them returning home? Anything that kind of stands out for you?
There's so many of them. I think we heard from one family who they'd been in Plet for the most of the December period, and they went back. And they were there 2 days, and the mother found herself, it was pitch dark and it was only 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and she was helping her little kids feed the ducks, and she said, "What on earth are we doing here?" And that was their decision. Literally within 2 days they turned around and came back and haven't looked back. And I think often people think I'm leaving for the sake of the children, but actually that where the children are the happiest is a lot of times here. I want to just add 2 more quick little things. The first is, can we all agree there is no such thing as an ex-South African? I mean, have you ever heard of an ex-American or an ex-Irish person? So you're a South African through and through. And I don't know if it is technically possible. I don't know how many people are on, but if it's easy that each person just can go, yeah, a Y, an N, or an M for maybe. Are you going to return home? Yes, no, or maybe. It would always be so good to hear, what the sentiment currently of the audience is. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Angel. So if anyone, if you could just pop that in the chat, like Angel said, would you consider? So yes, no, or maybe. So Y, N, or M, just in the chat quickly. That would be quite cool just to finish up. I mean, then there are some questions that have come in. Excuse me. In the last sort of few minutes, we'll try to get to those. So I'll just ask. I'll put them to relevant people in the panel. Maybe we can just try to be quite brief, but. Angel, one for you. So the South Africans that are returning home that you're dealing with, do they tend to be quite well established in the countries they've moved there and have been there for quite a while, or have they been there for sort of a shorter term?
The ones returning from Australia, they've mainly been there sort of 10 plus years. The ones coming back from the UK, it's probably between 2 years to 5+ years, but the trigger points are having a kid, so or wanting to just got married and wanting to start a family. When you've had a kid abroad, you realize actually how lucky it is to have lots of help back home from all sides of an amazing community. So, not necessarily for that long that people turn around and come back. And some people come back after 20, 30 years. Many people are coming back to retire. They know this is the place that actually gives you the best lifestyle and bang for your buck in retirement.
Awesome. Thanks, Angel. Then sort of a bit of an unfortunate experience, but Candice has one for you. So the person asking the question said they flew out of SA last week, and at departure passport control, they were actually threatened with arrest as they couldn't produce a renounced SA citizenship or permission to have a second passport form. Is that something you're familiar with?
Again, it's the Wild West sometimes at these airports. But basically what they're saying is that you need to, as a South African, leave South Africa on a South African passport and enter South Africa on a South African passport. It goes back to what I was originally saying, is it's good housekeeping is really important. Keeping your documentation in order and up to date, I think, is the key to sort of resolving all this potential of losing your citizenship, or, the risk of not being able to apply for it in the country and having it in time for you to depart, because a lot of people fly into South Africa because the process to get a passport here is quicker than to get it from abroad. I mean, to get a passport in a high commission in South Africa, in the UK, can take anything between 6 to 12 months, whereas coming here, it's 10 days minimum, or maximum, let's put it that way. So I do think a lot of people do play that up. Having dual passports, you're entitled to a dual passport. South Africa acknowledged that. I think the UK is the same. So We don't have any issues with you having multiple passports or dual passports. It's a matter of declaration. You do need to admit you have another passport. It's complicated. I think in that situation, it was merely a warning. It was a case of have your South African document if you're departing South Africa.
Yeah, and the way the message is relayed can very much depend on the day that the custom control personnel is having. Yeah. So no, that's thank you, Candace. So yeah, we're going to need to round up now, but we've had a few responses, and I guess which is understandable because of if you're attending this webinar, you have some interest, but we have sort of an even split between yeses and maybes, and also a couple of people have mentioned spending time between the UK and SA, which perhaps that's quite a quite an evident trend, because if you have obviously if you worked overseas and you have a business or you come work here, etc., I guess it could be ideal to spend time between the two countries, especially if perhaps your kids are remaining in the UK. So that's another thing to consider. But yeah, it looks like there's no other questions, and yeah, we have actually come to the end of the webinar. So the panelists have shared their contact details in the chat, so you should be able to see that chat now. But if not, you're welcome to reach out to the chamber, via the contact details in the confirmation that you receive for the webinar, or you can just visit the websites and use the general contact form, and we can help you out there. But yeah, to close off, I just want to say thank you very much to our panelists. I think it was a really good spread of sort of experience and insights, and quite nice to get some insight into the technical aspects as well as some of the softer, perhaps, hot decisions involved. So I think both sort of sides of the coin need to be considered. But, the fact is people do return and, build or resume really good lives and, obtain good jobs and perhaps start businesses and, retain holdings in the UK, etc. So, it very much is a trend, and it's, it's very easy to be very negative. That's what I find. And also, like Angel, that concept of, you don't get ex-South Africans, even though, you might meet a lot of people who aren't that positive. There's normally an equal amount of people who are positive. It just means who you cross paths with. So I think it's been a really great insight. So I've enjoyed it. And thanks to everyone for joining us. I hope you find it useful and enjoyable. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you in South Africa soon. But thanks again. And yeah, the webinar is recorded, so will be available, and the link will be shared. But with that, yeah, thanks again to everyone. And yeah, wishing you a good afternoon, evening further. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.